Thank you for listening to the Crown Refs Podcast, the audio experience for basketball officials. Serve the game.
When you give an answer back to a player or coach, you're also giving direction. Hey coach, I looked at that play 3-4 times. I don't see any issues wrong with that play. I need you now to help me here and not question me every time we walk up and down the floor. That's what I mean about direction. You're tying off that piece of the conversation, and now you're telling the player or coach, hey, I'm done with this. We need to move on.
I'd like to welcome everybody back to the Crown Refs Podcast. This is the Fiba edition because I'm bringing on Fiba basketball expert Scott Butler. Scott, good to have you. How you doing?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to catch up and make contact with people from around the world.
I just got to tell you a quick story on how we connected. This past June, I was at Roger Ayers' camp, and he had a great staff of clinicians, including Mr. Al Batista. So I see Al in the little conference room on Saturday morning. He comes up to me, after we exchanged niceties. He said, Paul, who would be a great guest for your podcast? I said, no, I don't. Tell me, enlighten me. I'm all ears. Because, what he says goes. He goes, Scott Butler is a great officiating mind from Fiba. He works the NBL, and I think, Paul, he would be great. So I immediately wrote your name down. I said, thank you so much, Al. I believe you. Al is the rules wizard over here in the States. So I put your name on my podcast list, and that's how we connected here. So appreciate having you on. Yeah,
like I've spoken to Al a couple of times, and that impression is 100% spot on. It's perfect.
Appreciate it, man. I've had a lot of reps editing Al, listening to him. We've done 3 podcasts together, and I must have spent 9 hours just listening to just him. So I'm working on it, though. I'll get better over time. I think it's something I can develop into my better ones. But thanks for that. Appreciate that.
Well, let's see how you go with the Aussie accent after this session.
So just for the audience, to give them a little bit of context on you, you are a NBL and Fiba referee. You worked over 500 games over the course of 22 seasons in the National Basketball League, which is the most popular league out in Australia. You were in 12 consecutive NBL Grand Final Series. You were 4 times Referee of the Year, which I think is really cool that Australia picks a Referee of the Year. You are now the head of referees for the NBL. NBL, of course, has teams across Australia and New Zealand. Just to give them a little bit more on your officiating career, you were a FIBA referee from 1997 until 2011, I believe. You worked a number of World Cups, 2006, 2010. The Olympics, you're an Olympic referee. You worked in 2004 in Athens, 2008 in China. And you were invited to referee in the NBA Summer League in 2006. So quite an international resume, and it's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. It's, as we were saying earlier on, I'm very fortunate to have a successful career and a long career. A lot of people don't ever get that opportunity, but I'm very thankful for the time I've had on the floor. As we were talking offline, for me, my career ended in 2012. I had a serious knee injury. The surgery wasn't successful. I came back for 1 season. I had a whole host of other issues, because of the knee injury. And for me, the best thing to do was do what was right for the game and retire. And so that's what I did.
Let's just double click down on that real quick and just talk to me about how it was. From a mindset perspective, kind of, you had a great officiating career. You're still in your prime. Early 40s is like prime for officials. So how were you able to overcome that time in your life?
I think that my mindset at the time was really, I had done everything I could to fix the injury, to go through the rehab process, go see the right doctors, get the right information, get the right expert input into how I would rehab and recover, and use the right people to help me get the muscle development back in place and run correctly again. Once I realized that I had turned over every stone possible, to me, it was a pretty simple decision to say that, could I run a game? Yes. But could I run the game the way I used to? No, I couldn't. And at the top level, at the elite level, as we all know, the 5%ers or the 1%ers, they all matter far too much sometimes. So for me, knowing in my own mind that there may have been a chance that 1% moment where I needed to be in the right spot and my knee wasn't going to allow me, that was the time, and that was the realization for me that it's time to retire.
And
do the right thing by the game? Yeah.
And did you transition immediately into a leadership role with the NBL?
No, I stepped out of the game for at the national level anyway for about 24 months.
Okay.
And but at the lower levels, I got re-engaged again at our state level. So back in my hometown at the time, all the state level programs and a little bit of junior development from time to time too. So I spent 2 years just doing some work there and with younger officials, and that was really interesting. It's a different type of education. It's a different type of coaching. You have to go back to that grassroots approach. Mm-hmm. And then once that sort of 2 years, that distance had occurred, the NBL contacted me again and said, "You want to get back into the program?" I said, "Yeah, no, I can do that." So I helped with a bit of mentoring and referee coaching initially, and then the NBL approached me about this job.
I want to get into more of what you're currently doing with the NBL, but let's rewind your story. Tell us what it was like growing up in Australia. I know it's a basketball crazed continent. So just, what was it like being an official in Australia and how you were able to move up the FIBA ladder?
Yeah, I grew up in regional Queensland. Queensland is the state, and it's the northern part of the country. Very hot, very dry. Like temperatures that, like in summer, you wake up in the morning and it's already 35 degrees Celsius. Like it's hot as hell.
Which is like 116 Fahrenheit, my guess.
Yeah, correct. It's
Okay.
it's in those regions. Like it's hot, but it's a great place to grow up because it's a real sporting place. All of the basketball's played, all of our football codes are played there as well. So you go to work, you go to school, and the entire community is involved in sport. So I played, like a lot of people. I played, and then I was playing at a junior age state level, and also officiating, for pocket money as well. And as it turned out, I was reasonably okay at officiating. And the good thing was my playing coach at the time said to me, "Do both for as long as you can, until you have to make a choice." And his view was that I shouldn't have to choose one or the other. And I think that stuck with me all these years, because as an adult trying to teach children and teenagers, is that you can give children choice, and they can make the right decisions for themselves. You don't have to tell them what to do. And I think that's a lesson for all adults when you go into child education or coaching kids or young athletes. So I kept playing for a long time and also refereeing a long time, but then it got to this pinch point where I was starting to officiate the level that I was playing, and it became a bit of a conflict of interest. So I went to what we call a state junior championship, and at the under 18 level, I just jumped straight to there. I missed all of the levels below that, and basically the state referee program identified me there and said, "We think you'll have a future." And so I then chose officiating, and then went through the normal process of refereeing your junior games. We don't have a college league like they do in parts of the States and Canada. We sort of jump from junior age up to a state men's program.
Just to stop you real quick, by junior age, you mean high school?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's all classified as junior, like what, from 9th grade all the way up to 12th?
Basically, yeah, the junior age would start from like under 10s, 9 years of age, and you progress up to under 10s, under 12s. Under 14s becomes, and in Australia becomes a national level recognition. So the various states play against each other at a state level. Under 16s, under 18s, and there's still an under 20 competition as well. Sometimes, that competition can be really strong. Sometimes it's not as strong because the players end up going to college in the States or actually go straight to play professionally. So we progress to that level, and then we jump straight to our basically our adult programs, our senior men's and women's programs at a state level as well. So those programs here now are called NBL 1, which is it's a feeder league they're feeder leagues to the NBL.
Okay.
And they're played in each state, and they're very strong competitions. They play in our winter, which is your summer, and quite a few of the NBL players, they fall back and play in those competitions if they're not going overseas. And clearly, because of the COVID environment and not being able to travel, a lot of NBL players did play in the NBL 1 competition this winter, just gone. And it's a very strong competition, and has been for a long time. So I then progressed through that competition, and then was identified for our national panel. A national panel is just broadly the Women's National League and the Men's National League. And I was identified for a potential FIBA badge, so an international badge at that stage. So effectively, from about the time I was then 19 and above, I was in that talent pipeline for our national program.
And just talk to me a little bit about the Olympics. I know you were there in 04 and 08. I think the international competition was excellent back then because USA was struggling in 04 or a few years before that. I think 08 was the year they kind of regained dominance, right? But What was it like reffing some of the great international players from the US and beyond?
Yeah, it's an experience. And when we first started having discussions, Paul, you recall I said to you that back in 2004, the Athens Olympics was still two-person. Wow. So you had to referee the best athletes in the world, men and women, two-person. That's
they were
difficult.
A little late. They were a little late on that.
Yeah, that was the last major senior tournament that was two-person officiating. But I can tell you that's really difficult to referee that stuff. And it's a great preparation though for those people who can still referee two-person, who want to eventually or still are refereeing three-person. When you referee two-person, you know where the holes are on the floor, and that should help you in three-person officiating as well to some degree. So yeah, Athens 2004. It was still a great USA team, but that was the year when the Argentinian team had Manu Ginobili and all of those guys.
Luis Scola.
Yeah, all the people that you've seen play in the NBA. They were a big team. The Greek team was amazing as well. The Puerto Rican team was amazing too, and that was
the US a few years ago.
Well, that was the year that 2004 was when Puerto Rico beat USA in Athens at the Olympics. An interesting story, maybe funny, maybe not for some people, but when after that loss, USA then played Greece, and so you could imagine, Greece playing at home, in the venue, and it's just gone crazy. It's nuts. But eventually, the USA pull away. So the crowd, they think they're funny. They start chanting Puerto Rico in the background. You may have beaten us, but you lost to Puerto Rico. It's the international environment is very, very different from regular season. Jump forward to 2006, World Champs in Japan, another major tournament, another crazy tournament. This time Greece beat USA in the rounds. So the USA can only play off for the bronze medal game, and they play Argentina. In the gold medal game was Greece and Spain. So the Greek team had guys like Baby Shaq, that they refer to those, and those type of guys, and Spanos and all those amazing players who still play in EuroLeague. And then you go to the Spanish team, and Rubio, just so many great players in Marcasol, Pau Gasol, all those people. And I actually worked the bronze medal game, which was USA and Argentina. And I can tell you that game was, war sounds like, an overstatement, but it was a war. thankfully it was 3-person officiating because that made it just a little bit easier. But that was a great game as well. LeBron played in that game, and Dwayne Wade was there. Amazing basketball. Great to see both teams as well in terms of the spirit that they played. There was nothing dirty. It was just hard, intense athletes, going for it. 2008, the Olympics in Beijing. Again, great players everywhere, and this is where obviously when the USA then started to reassert their dominance. Kobe played, and the gold medal game was Spain and USA, and again that was another crazy game. I think anyone who wants to see a good example of international basketball, not only play physically but play beautifully as well, that's the game I'd say go watch. That's the one I would watch. Incredible. I worked the women's bronze medal game at Beijing, but through the tournament I did some really high level European games as well. 2010 was the World Cup in Turkey. I jokingly we had some of those games that we call ref killer games, Serbia versus Croatia. These big ticket games where it's more than just a game. It's it's about almost brothers fighting brothers. It's crazy stuff. And then and unfortunately that was my last international tournament because I injured myself and couldn't go back to London.
Thanks for sharing that, and I appreciate you bringing back up Baby Shaq. I would have forgot about him, but he's a pretty legendary Olympic character, at least from my perspective. That was a great era. You mentioned a lot of great names from the Spanish teams and Argentina teams, so I'm sure it was a lot of fun for you to ref.
Yeah, it was.
All right, I have a few notes here that I took from our call offline, and I'm just going to kind of run them off, and you could take it from there. I have, you were talking about the difference between the Fiba game versus the World Cup and the Olympics, specifically like the professional leagues, right? Versus the Olympics and World Cup. Why don't you elaborate on that?
Yeah, the experience when you first jump into particularly a senior men's and women's tournament at the World Cup and Olympic level, it's a little bit jarring because it's different in the sense that the players mean everything to the game, and they should mean everything to the game in normal circumstances, but you have to contextualize it in the sense that you've got a very short amount of time for the tournament to occur, and as an official you have to be really mindful about how much you interfere in the game. So the things that you might do in a regular season environment back in your own national league, where you've got 20 rounds or 22 rounds of basketball across a 160 game regular season, compared to a very, very short window at the World Cup or the Olympics. So you can establish a momentum and a cadence back in the regular season, but you can't do that same. You can't have that same approach at a World Cup or Olympics. Basically, every referee has to drop all of the nuances from your own federations. They have to go. If you've got a particular way of calling something, you've got to shed that pretty quickly, because every referee has to be on the same page right from the get-go. Because otherwise, you're going to spend a day or 2 days trying to work out how the game is going to be called, and everyone's settling into the same pattern. So typically what happens is at the World Cup and Olympics, the game is more physical. So the referees you often find yourself erring on the side of not making a call.
Sounds like my type of game.
Yeah. You tread this line between making sure that the game can be physical in a legal way, versus if anything's dirty, if someone uses an elbow or uses something sharp, you bang that up straight away. You say, we're not doing that tonight. That's not what we're allowing here. But you use your body, you use your arms in the right way. You can be as physical as you need to be, as long as you're not fouling someone in the act of shooting those obvious things. So there's some of this. That's a real key difference. And the game often looks a lot physical. When you watch an international game at those tournaments, you often see players and go, well, why are the referees calling that? Well, that's because of the philosophy at a very condensed window of basketball. You have to be careful about how much you interfere.
Understood. Thanks for sharing and kind of differentiating between those two games. I know there's some FIBA referees that are listening. I just want to go back to what you're saying between, dirty and physical. How do you kind of find the difference when you were reffing between physical play versus a dirty play?
Some of the stuff we're doing now with our guys in the NBL is that we're making sure that if it looks like a basketball act, then we're assessing the impact of the play. If it's not a basketball act, if someone uses their knee to maybe shift the post off the low block, that's not necessarily a basketball play. So, or someone uses, as I said before, someone uses something sharp. They use their knee or they use their elbow to clear someone out. Those types of things, they would be considered dirty plays. Or any play where there's contact to the face or the head of the opponent. That would be unusual for a whistle not to happen on some of those plays. Of course, there's always going to be incidental contact. We all know that. As officials at the top level, we know that the game is physical. Sometimes, there's going to be incidental contact. That doesn't mean it's necessarily dirty. So we're making sure that when players target someone, when they're trying to take them out of the game by using illegal tactics and they're dirty, we want those things called straight away. So again, elbows, knees, that type of stuff. On the rebound contest, it's okay if people lock up on the contest, as long as when that ball comes down, that play dissolves, we're okay. But as soon as you've got someone locking that arm, clamping them and throwing to the floor, that's the type of stuff that we want to clean up. And I think that's another good way to explain, FIBA want the game they want to clean the game to get rid of the dirty stuff, to get rid of those overt acts, which actually could cause some injury. But physicality with the body is good.
That makes a lot of sense. You also mentioned in these physical games, it's really important to have a high level of awareness. What advice would you give for an official to increase their overall game and crew awareness?
Yeah, I think the first place I would start is, and this would make perfect sense as soon as I start, it's your scouting before the game. You've got to do your work. Your work's got to be done before the game in terms of knowing who your key players are, knowing who the scorers are. Even if it's your first game, say at an international level, knowing who the left-handed shooters are, who the right-handed shooters are. When you're watching the warm-up, looking at players' preferences, do they like to go left, like to go right, do they like to step back? When they're on the low block, do they curl high or they curl low? Those types of things. So some of that's done through your scouting, and then some of that's done through the warm-up at the start of a game as well. But once you're on the floor, you're looking for matchups. You're looking for looking for the athletes on the floor. Are they all stretch fours, stretch fives? With a couple of key guards in there. I mean, as you know, the game has changed so much in the last 5-6 years. You've got players who are 6'10", can step outside and shoot the three easily, but also they're just as much at home in the low block, working the paint as well. So anytime there's a timeout, anytime there's a sub, how does that change my look on the floor? How does that change my matchups on the floor? Am I looking when I'm coming down the floor, looking at the half court set? How is the defense set up? Is it just a zone? Is it a loose man on man type situation, or is it hand pressure defense everywhere? Or are they doing some old school stuff like you see from time to time, box and one, and they've got one of their key defenders, just tagging the key player on the opposition as well. So all of those keys and all of those features to the game should influence how you're going to officiate the game. Does the defense play? Do they switch all, or do they hedge and still make sure they keep their assignments? That type of stuff should really be a key signal to how you're going to officiate. And a great example is a simple example is on-ball screens. If the offense is setting the high on-ball screen, is it is it the big setting the high on ball screen? If so, who's guarding the big? And looking at the space behind where the on ball screen's being set. So if it's not the big setting the screen, is it a guard on guard contest? So do you now have, two guards on the ball and two guards on the screen? That means that once we get around that screen, there's going to be an immediate defensive contest on the floor. But when it's the big setting the screen, generally the defender will show, and that gives you a different type of look as well. So your positioning can be different too. So if you're not alive to those things in terms of your scouting, and then looking at who your matchups are on the floor, you're going to miss so much because you're not ready, and you're always behind the play rather than being in front of the play.
You mentioned a lot of great things about preparation and, strategically getting yourself ready for the game by knowing the other teams. I just want you to draw the line. When or how do you kind of balance between going in the game and knowing kind of too much about what happened in the past and making sure that you don't just go out and recreate something that you were thinking about? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And that is something that, when I'm talking to the coaching staff of the clubs, it's a key thing for referees to keep in mind, because the teams, they want us to scout, they want us to know what the tendencies are of various players, but you also have to be really sure that you are not using that information to color your decision making. If you're doing that, then you are not being fair to that player. So yes, be prepared, understand that certain players like to go right, like to go left. Understand that certain players like to shoot in the mid-range J, or they like to come off, curl off the baseline flex cut and shoot that 3-point and those type of things. Or some players, like to act a little bit. We all know who they are. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand those players and their tendencies. But once you're on the floor, you're judging purely actions. If you're judging the action and your play calling is up to speed in the sense that you see the play all the way through from start, develop, finish, or beginning, middle, end, it doesn't really matter the terminology. Mm-hmm. So if you see the play from the start, you see the develop part of the play, and then you show that level of patience to let the play finish, then that'll give you the best chance to process the play all the way through, so that you're judging the action and the impact of the play, not actually judging the player and what they have been known to do beforehand.
Yeah, Mark Wunderlich, mentioned something very similar, and this is something that we study, start, develop, finish, decide. The longer you can look at a play, the more information you can gather, the better decision you can make for that play.
It's absolutely spot on, and it's critical. I think that if you're looking at the toolkit of an elite official, the elite official who understands play calling from a start, develop, finish perspective, and then assessing the impact of the play, they're the ones who are most successful. Anyone can call a game relatively successfully and accurately without even really considering the finish of the play, because you can look at any play and slow motion, or you can pause it and you can see contact and say, "Oh, there's my foul." But does it really have an impact on the play? And if it doesn't, then you might be inadvertently strangling the play, and you might be pulling the play up when there's a better opportunity that happens further down the court. So there's a few things like that you need to consider as an elite official.
When I'm evaluating officials, one of the first things I look at is not what they're calling, but what they're not calling. What do you think of that?
Yeah. Interesting point, because again, I agree with you. I actually measure, as part of some of my performance measurements of my crew, of my team in the NBL, I actually tag and measure correct no calls, where I look at the decision-making element of an official's performance, and how many correct no calls did they make that were actually good for the game. I'm not talking about simple calls where there's a little bit of a bump on the hip, it gets around. I'm talking about good verticality plays at the rim, where the defenders they're legal, they jump vertical, the offense hits them in the air, there's contact, and the contact's all legal. We see a great athletic play at the end. The offense puts the shot in. We come back to the floor. We're safe. Off we go. I look at those types of plays and I actually measure them to make sure the referees are rewarded for those correct no calls. And I refer to that in my performance matrix as decision making. Because you can make correct calls. You can make incorrect calls. You can have incorrect no calls, which are just misses. But you're also making decisions all the time on correct no calls as well around the floor. Did this contact impact the play? No, it didn't. Did this contact fit within the league directions? No, it didn't. So it's okay to play on. So I make sure that those things are recognized in officials' performance as well.
And when you're quantifying officials' correct call percentage and you're watching it on film, is this something where you watch from multiple angles and you're like zooming in, or are you just watching from like the main angle of the TV broadcasts? What's your process like?
Yeah, so three things initially. So I measure three sets of performance. So accuracy, efficiency, and decision making. We can go back to them if you want at some stage and talk about the detail. But I sit for every game. I sit at the moment in our replay center.
Okay.
So in the replay center, I have access to 9 angles on plays potentially.
You got all your info you need.
Yeah, correct. So, but in real time, we're always watching broadcasts to get a feel for someone's performance. Now, if I need to use certain angles to look at a call, whether it's right or wrong, then I'll do that. But generally, if I've got to look at 3 or 4 angles on a play to assess whether a call is right or wrong, it really does become a coaching opportunity for me. I think that's a critical difference around how I'm assessing performance. Some things are definitely coaching opportunities. Some things are about assessment. You've made this call. You know what? This call is actually not quite right for the game. You look at these things on the broadcast. You can see even on broadcast it's not quite right. When you add these other angles in, and if we're lucky, you sometimes get an angle that the official has. You add that angle and you go, well, it's clearly wrong. So yes, we say that the call's wrong, and then we go into coaching. But there needs to be some acknowledgement in my mind that is the call correct or not, and then we go into the coaching aspect of the play.
Only reason why I ask you that, obviously, I know you have a lot of technology at the NBL, but most of the officials listening, don't have all those camera angles. And there's a common phrase in the industry called "film doesn't lie." And I just had to clarify that a little bit, because if you're only watching one camera angle, there's a chance the film could lie, because you could either be stacked or just not have an open angle on the contact. If you're looking at 3, 4 different camera angles, then yes, I don't think film does lie. But I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I think, Paul, film is generally definitive when you've got the right information. Again, for me, if I'm having to slow-mo plays from 3 or 4 different angles, then I just jump straight to a coaching point. The right or wrong doesn't really matter right now. It's about how do we improve this for the future. If broadcast gives me a pretty good indication that it's right or wrong, then generally when you go to other angles, the other angles will show you whether the call is right or wrong as well.
It's like when you have to rewind to travel like 10 times and pause it. It's like, if you're going to rewind to travel 10 times, it's probably something you should let go in real time. What's your thoughts on that?
I agree. It's when I'm reviewing a game for people, and where I'm doing the cut up in sports code, anything that requires me to review multiple times, rather than it be defined as a correct call or an incorrect call, or incorrect no call, or a correct no call, it just goes to the review category. And I go back to the review category and I put some comments in there, look at principles of the play and discuss.
You mentioned something really interesting, and it's one of the worst feelings I think we have as officials. It's when the game gets away from us, we get behind the game and it falls apart so quickly. What are some of the elements that you see which does cause a game to do that, and how do we get back to being ahead of the game if possible?
Yeah, I think this for me is, you can make this really complex if you want to, and if we had 3 or 4 hours, we could talk about this and only talk about this topic. I think some of the simple things that sort of come out at me and are really obvious are when you're on the floor and you're looking, at the half court set. Let's just start there. You often get caught because you're not really concentrating. You're not really focusing on your primary. So what's my primary? What am I supposed to be looking at here? What is my responsibility? Am I on ball? Am I off ball? Where's the clock? Where's the game clock? Where's the shot clock? So the game often gets away from us because we get left behind because we haven't focused on what my responsibility is at the time. So we've come down the floor in center. I'm on the weak side. I'm in the slot, depending on what definition you use. I'm sitting there, and I've got really nothing to do right now because all the action's on the strong side of the floor. But if you then switch off, you're then going to miss any weak side cut, any weak side drive. You're going to miss what's on the shot clock. But also, you're not ready for the action when the play does develop and heads down your side of split. And I've sort of termed this, you're then chasing the play or you're being rushed by the play. So it doesn't matter where you are on the floor, what position you are on the floor. If you've got nothing to do or minimal to do in your primary, you should then be looking for information in dual coverage or extended coverage, looking into the gaps of the floor and the space on the floor to find out what might happen next. Where are the matchups that are likely to come into my part of the floor? So they're the types of things that when the game gets away from you, you start chasing that, and that's where the errors come from, because you initially weren't ready. You've relaxed far too much. You weren't, in some common vernacular, people talk about an active mindset. You weren't active and looking for information to say, how am I going to be ready for the next play, even though right now I don't have too much to do. And that happens quite regularly. And I see errors in transition, particularly from the center official, and sometimes from the new lead official, because they're too focused on getting to the new position on the floor rather than finding the information in transition that will best put them in the right position once we get down to the other end of the floor. So that's, for me, the best example I can give to you is that transition plays are where a lot of errors occur, because the most engaged official is the new trail. They've got the ball, they're chasing the ball up the floor, they're already engaged. But the center official is often not engaged at all, and they're just staring into space. And the new lead official, they're working on getting themselves to the baseline, but they're forgetting about looking at the play and finding out, is the play coming down on the strong side? Is the play coming down on the weak side? And that then indicates where I need to be on the floor once I get up to my setup on lead.
So you find in these transition plays, when lead is running parallel to the play, oftentimes they're calling across the paint with a closed look?
Yeah, there's that. There's also, let me try and paint this picture. Let's start in the half court again. So we're in the half court. The current trail official has got the shooter. Shot goes up. So shot goes up. The trail official's in shot coverage. Shooter comes back down. We're safe. We're now in rebound coverage. So all three officials are in rebound coverage. The rebound has been secured. We're now in transition coverage. So each of those moments of shooter coverage, rebound coverage, transition coverage should tell you, I've got to be looking in certain places around the floor. Where are my matchups? Where are my primary defenders? Where are my closest players who are going to impact the play? So the old trail, who's now the new lead, if the rebound has happened right in front of the baseline, I can probably get down the floor quite easily. But if the ball rebounds long and it's a turnover, I've got to make sure I find the offensive player. I've got to find my first primary defender. And I also want to find the secondary defenders who might challenge those plays at the rim as well. So once I'm in transition, I'm looking for some key things around the floor. Where's the ball? Where's the primary defender? Where's the secondary defenders? And where do I need to be to best referee this play? Now, if I'm ahead of the play, great. If I'm not ahead of the play, well, I need to work a little bit harder to make sure I get to the baseline before the players do.
Excuse me. Incorrect call, edit.
Let's give us some water as well, man.
Mm-hmm. You're on fire right now, bro. I wanted to bring you on to talk about a lot of the things that we normally talk about, the pillars of officiating, but to get, a different spin on it is great. Just talk to me a little bit more about your play calling philosophy.
Yeah, so I think I'll talk about the play calling philosophy, especially from a national league perspective, because not every official is going to referee at the FIBA level on a regular basis. Some of us are lucky to do so, but some don't get there at all. When you're in your national program, whether you're refereeing the NBL or refereeing out of South America, or you're refereeing EuroLeague or the BCL out of Europe as well, or Euro Cup, you have to make sure that whatever the league directions are, that you fall in line with them as quickly as possible. You and I can sit here and we can talk philosophy for 3 days straight, and we might agree on some things, we might disagree on some things, but when we're on the floor together, if our boss says this is how we want the game called, then that's what we must do. So my first point of emphasis for everybody would be play calling is derived from the league directions in particular. League directions are not just plucked out of the air. There's research around it. FIBA in particular do research, and they look at how certain types of fouls are impacting the flow of the game, and they put in methods or ways or call types to help improve those areas they want to improve. It's exactly the same for national leagues as well. So play calling initially comes from there, but the other element of play calling for me it's really important is that you're always looking for ways to clean the game. You're looking for ways to cover the game so that you've always got the best look. A really simple philosophy or training technique for my guys is that on every given play, do you have the open look? If you don't, then you need to move. Now, the good thing is when you start to identify these types of things on play calling, if I don't have the open look, quite often you only need to take maybe one step to your left or one step to your right. Often that's enough. But the play calling element to get to call plays correctly is driven from, do I have the open look? And if I don't, I need to make sure I have the open look on the play. When I'm on lead, do I have a good wire position on lead to get as much information as possible? If I'm narrow, as you know, everything becomes too big too quickly. So I need to make sure that whenever that play is in the paint, I've got a wide position to get as much info as possible on that play as well. There's other things too around how you have dual coverage opportunities on plays as well. There's always a high side and low side to a play, and it doesn't matter where you put the players on the floor. This principle will always ring true. If you've got action in the paint, the baseline official, they've got the low side of the play quite often, but the center official and the trail official, they've got the elements of high side of the play. So the help D, who was originally on the 3-point shooter and they're now back in the paint, they may close down, they may reach and try to stop the player from getting to the paint with the dribble penetration and then the shot. So you can't forget about the high side of the play as well when you're officiating. It's more than just the primary defender. You're looking for the secondary defenders as well. Those elements should all help you with your play calling, because it'll orient you and your mind to looking for this information around the floor. So if I'm in the slot, and we spoke about this offline, if I'm in the slot in center and the post play is on the opposite block, Now, it's not my responsibility yet because lead has it. But as soon as that post play curls into the paint and curls away from lead, I need to switch on and be ready to help. Because for that, there's a moment there where the lead official is stacked on the play, but the person with the open angle is the center official, and they can help with the high side of the play. So the sneaky guard decides to reach down and hit the high hand of the post player so they can't gather the ball to shoot. That should be the center official should have the open angle on those types of plays. So play calling should really be driven through what am I looking at? How can I help in dual coverage? Where are my threats? So where are my secondary defenders? But also make sure you never forget about what's in your primary as well.
And the last play you mentioned was an example of proximity not always being primary there, right?
Absolutely. That phrase, whoever coined that phrase.
I think Mark Davis wants the props for that.
Well, let's all give Mark Davis a golf clap because he's 100% correct. And quite often an official will have the open look, who's the most unexpected official to have the open look on the play. And that's why I think it's really good to encourage dual coverage opportunities. Where they're legitimate dual coverage opportunities. I'm not talking about extending and calling out of the area too far, and which can sometimes ruin the confidence of your partner. I'm talking about paint plays on split, those types of things. Block charge plays in transition that are on split, and the trail and center official can actually work with each other on those plays as well. That proximity primary element, I think, is an important thing to add. I think it's an important sort of lens to put over your view of the game, particularly at the elite level, because the players and coaches don't care if the official on the baseline misses the hands foul, misses the foul on post action, and they look at you and go, well, you can see that, and they go, well, it's not my primary.
Can't say
They're
that.
going to go, no, you can't say that at all. You can't. If you start saying those things, you're going to lose credibility instantly. So
good. Let's transition to your communication style when you were an official and what you teach your referees now as far as communication, game management, and running the game.
I think the first point to start with is that use your own style and personality. Don't try and be something else. I think the moment you try to do something or maybe emulate someone else in the way they do things, it's just not, when it's not natural, I think it then drives other unnatural behaviors as well in terms of how you communicate. So for me, I was, when I was on the floor, I wasn't a big talker, but my communication was always direct, and it was always providing information, but it was always casual as well. I was very rarely was I ever flustered or upset by stuff, because I understood the context was players and coaches are just trying to win. Okay, sure, they're yelling at me right now, but they could be yelling at you, Paul, if you happen to be on the floor. So it doesn't really matter, that they're yelling at me because they're yelling at the official. So I always tried to make sure that one, my communication style was casual and easygoing where it needed to be. If a player or coach was yelling at me, sometimes it's good to let the player or coach let off steam. But as we all know, there's a limit to that. Mm-hmm. There's a limit to that type of behavior. But a tactic that I think works really well is that when a player or coach is arguing or upset about a play and they're hot, if they spike with their emotion but come straight back down, that's a good sign that you can now communicate. Okay. If they spike with their behavior and stay up there and they're redlining, your response is now different.
Right.
But if you're encouraging players to have that emotion, then come straight back down, you get to the communication piece a little bit sooner. So some of the stuff that I'm often trying to do on the floor, and I encourage my guys to do, is that you're asking questions of the player to get an understanding of what's actually happening. When you're listening to the player or coach talk, listen for understanding, don't listen to reply. Again, that's another maxim that, many people use, and it's really true. When you're listening to reply, you're often missing the message that's being given to you. If you listen to understand, you're better able to work your way through the edges and understand how I need to respond. So the other thing that I think is really important is that when it's just general, it's really high level stuff, that might be okay to have that conversation for a few seconds, but you're not going to resolve anything at all, particularly if the play's in motion. So you want to get from the general to the specific as quickly as possible. And you do that through questions. Or you push that back to the player or coach and say, I'm not sure I understand what you're telling me here. What's the question that you have? Now, that's enough of a bump for the player or coach to think about, okay, they're talking to me. They actually want me to ask a question. They should now come back with the question. If they don't come back with the question, well, then we know the conversation right now is they're just blowing off steam. They're not really looking for an engagement. So you can move on. So I would encourage everyone to think about getting from the general to the specific very, very quickly. Anyone with a law background or policy background will understand why. When you look at any sort of official documents, policy documents, they often start off very general and then work their way down to be very specific. So that's where that principle comes from. Make sure you ask questions. Make sure you get the player or coach to ask you a question so you understand what the issue is. In hot games, when the game's in motion, and there's already play happening on the floor, I would be just telling the player and coach, I'm working right now. I'll get back to you when the time's right.
Love it.
But make sure you get back to them. Because if you don't, you're going to lose credibility. My coaches here, one of their biggest issues with the officials is that they're happy with the communication that generally goes on. They're unhappy when the referee says, I'll get back to you, but never comes back.
I know I could clearly tell me and you are on the same page because you're talking about your general and specific philosophy. I have something pretty similar that I talk to officials about on how to better manage the coach. It's like a lot of what coaches say to us is very general. It's not specific. It's, hey, Paul, you got to watch number 54. He's hitting my guy with his left arm when he goes to the right. He's not going to give you some specifics. He's going to say we're getting hit. You got to call the same thing on the other end. So when they go generic, that's when we go specific. Oh, coach, do you have a specific play that you're referring to? What are you seeing out there? And just like you said, the use of questions is a very effective tool because you're almost buying time. You're showing that you're a good listener, and then you're putting the ball back in their court and forcing them to respond under your framework.
Yeah, 100%. I think all of that's correct, and that's good advice for any official at any level. The other element too, I think that will be often underestimated in the communication field is your relationship with the player and coach, particularly in the regular season environment, is critical, absolutely critical. If you establish a good rapport and a good relationship with the player or coach, you'll be able to work through any issue on the floor, no matter how heated. And the next time that you see them or speak with them, often the heat will be out of the game. So don't underestimate the utility of the relationship on the floor. Now, I'm not talking about relationships that that often you don't want to be slapping five, that type of stuff. I'm talking about it's a good working relationship. I can talk to you, you can talk to me. If you step out of line, I'm going to tell you not step out of line. If I have to give you a technical foul, it's just business. It's nothing personal. If the player or coach says something that's kind of out of bounds, and it's just an emotional reaction, it's not personal. The relationship element is just as important as well, because as you know, when you're working a regular season at the high level, there's a lot of rounds in a row where you're seeing the same people regularly. Mm-hmm. Our last season, as I said, we had a 160 game regular season. That round by round churn, games every day of the week, that's a difficult thing to get through. And quite often, your communication success is through the relationships and making sure that, when you go back and watch the tape and if you were wrong with something, when you see that person next time say, hey, watch the tape, I was wrong. Sorry about that. That all adds to the mix of having a better outcome with communication. The other thing I neglected to say about communication is that when you give an answer back to a player or coach, you're also giving direction. What I mean by that is, if you looked at a player a few times because the coach has brought your attention to it, you might have said to the player, to the coach, sorry, coach, I'm going to make sure I look at that play the next 3-4 times down the floor, and I'm going to get back to you. Now, you legitimately go watch that play because it's in your primary, and you've looked and you don't see anything wrong with it. So when you go back to the coach, you say, hey, coach, I looked at that play 3-4 times in this last 2 minutes of play. I don't see any issues wrong with that play. I need you now to help me here and not question me every time we walk up and down the floor. That's what I mean about direction. So I haven't said don't do anything. I need you to help me. So there needs to be something at the end of it where you're tying off that piece of the conversation and putting that to the side. And now you're telling the player or coach, hey, I'm done with this. We need to move on.
That's great. It's great to have an approach where you almost have like an introduction where you're getting the coach's attention, then you're getting into the body of your message, and then you're winding up with the outro, whether that be a question back to him. But it's very strategic, and you mentioned some very skillful ways to communicate. You also talked about one of the things I mentioned is dictating the terms of the dialogue. So as officials, running the game, we have the opportunity to dictate what we talk about. You mentioned something similar, being able to control the tempo of the conversation. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, look, this might be more driven too from maybe the I guess the Australian sort of style of communication as well. It's it's probably no surprise, but we're pretty relaxed too. And generally communication on the floor is pretty relaxed. It's very rare to see, lots of technical fouls in our national league. You see some from time to time, but there's not a lot. You don't see, it's not part of our culture to see a coach go absolutely crazy and be tossed out. It's not that that's not the style in Australia nor in New Zealand as well. So it's a different approach. So, the way we sort of communicate is often conversational. It's very relaxed. It's often it's a bit like what you and I are doing right now on the floor. And then when it gets hot, it's, well, hey, I need to be certain that you're clear about what you're questioning, so I can give you a response. But even with our response, it's still very relaxed as well. So the tempo and the way we sort of manage the conversation is that when I'm in game and the game's in motion and I've got to put that whistle in my mouth, I'm not going to have too many conversations with you unless I have to. When the game stopped, that's fine. Good example is, Paul, you call a shooting foul. You've presented to the bench, you go to your next spot. I tell my guys that in terms of tempo, we are not stopping. After we blow that foul, we are not stopping to have a conversation, to run a rule clinic or explain my call before I get to the bench.
Right.
So I'm gonna make that foul call, or you're gonna make that foul call. You're going to the bench, number 7, hands foul. You go to your next spot. There's the conversation now. So that's control the tempo of the play for me, of the conversation.
And that's big. I got into early trouble early in my career doing that, where you call a foul and the coach barks and you go address the coach before handling your business and reporting the foul, which is what we're absolutely supposed to do. And then you wind up forgetting who the foul was on, and then it throws you all off. So
yeah, and you've got those players that you trust and like as well on the floor, who are always they're good with their communication and they're courteous and they're positive. And sometimes they trick you into stopping as well on the floor. It doesn't matter. Your process should be exactly the same every single time. Bang, I call that foul, we're shooting two, I walk to the bench, I get clear, I signal, and I go to my spot. And that's where the conversation occurs. Now there's two primary outcomes from that approach that I'm trying to communicate here. One is that if the question is serious about the call, they will come and talk to you about the call when you're back at your next position. But also, if the player is really hot, can you imagine? I mean, imagine what's going to go wrong if you stop in the middle of the key, middle of the paint, after you've made the call before you even gone to the bench. That play can blow up in your face. So you actually give the player a little bit of a chance to cool down and his teammates to calm him down a little bit. I made the call, 2 shots, signal to the bench, go to my next spot. Now, if the player then comes to you, if they're now calm, you can actually have a productive conversation. But if they come to you and they're still riding you, the response now might be different. Mm-hmm. So you're giving players the chance to just, I got to chill right now. I know what Paul's trying to do. Paul's giving me a chance just to calm down. Now Paul's now going to his next spot. The player's now got a decision to make. Do I continue to ride Paul and risk a technical, or do I go over to Paul and say, Paul, I'm not happy with that play. Can you tell me what's going on? So for my guys, exactly. So for my guys, if that player has chased you from the baseline out to the score table, when you go to your next spot, if you turn around and that player is still there and they're still drawing, well, you're probably going to go technical foul at that stage. So it sets a really good demarcation around, I've got to do my job. You can talk to me still, but it needs to be done in the right way. And that's what I mean about tempo.
Sounds like sportsmanship is pretty good in Australia.
Yeah, look, it's good. It's not a bad place to officiate. I mean, there's a funny sort of way about how we do things. Like the game can be ultra physical sometimes because I think we discussed this offline. We're Australia and New Zealand for that matter. We're brought up on a diet of the various football codes. We have the Australian-based game, which is Australian Football League, AFL. We have the National Rugby League, which is rugby league itself, and we also have rugby union. Australians love those types of sports, and so do New Zealand. For anyone who knows about the All Blacks, the rugby union team for New Zealand, one of the greatest sporting teams of any sport. People in Australia and New Zealand are used to physical games, so sometimes the game can be that can sort of filter into our game, but generally people are pretty chill most of the time.
That's so funny you mentioned that rugby and Australian rules football actually filter into basketball because the country's so passionate about it. Pretty cool.
Yeah. It's something that we had to do initially with when I was asked to do this job. The ownership said to me that they wanted to make sure that the game was some of the overt physicality was removed from it, and when you sort of unpack that and you talk to the players and coaches, it's because of we grew up on football, most of us, and it does, and unfortunately it does sort of infect the game from time to time. But we've done a pretty good job over the last 5 seasons of making the game far more attractive. It's still physical, but it's no longer inadvertently dirty.
Talk to me a little bit about more what you do with the NBL. What's your training like with your staff? What are some of the things and points of emphasis you're looking at for this upcoming season?
So let's maybe we just talk about points of emphasis and league direction. So one of the obvious ones is, if you wanted to sort of pull them up to sort of high level concepts, freedom of movement is clearly one of them. We want to open the game up as much as possible to allow players to be athletic, to allow more shots. So we're a little bit tighter on the off-ball movement. So if players are grabbing and holding off the ball and they're restricting players to be able to cut and move, we're making that call. And that took a while for some of my officials, I should say, to adjust to, because what they were used to doing was they were used to using preventative officiating, but the prevention was at the back end when the illegal contact had already occurred. So someone was holding someone off the ball, and they're saying, "Don't hold, don't hold, don't hold." But then the impact of actually saying that 3 or 4 times, yes, the player would then stop holding, but the moment for the offensive player was finished. They couldn't move anymore. So we've sort of moved that decision-making process forward. And if a player is illegally holding someone, if the offensive player can't move and their freedom of movement is restricted, bang, that's a foul. So that's really changed the architecture of our game as well. Shooter protection, another key point. No surprise for anyone refereeing at the elite level. We want to make sure that shooters can land safely. We want to make sure that if their landing space is taken, that those fouls are called. And what we've seen over the last 4 seasons is the evolution of that. We were really, really hard on that initially. There were lots of defensive fouls, lots of M1 type plays, particularly on perimeter shots. But then over a couple of seasons, the defensive players were better at managing that. And now we're seeing more and more of the offense now, kicking out and searching for the defender, because the defenders have adjusted. And now we're starting to call more of those offensive fouls on the shooter as well for shooter kickouts. Removing unnecessary physicality is another point of emphasis or league direction. Players using elbows, unnecessary contact to the head, those types of things where it could be avoided. We try to make sure that we get that out of the game as well. Using knees on screens where you set the big sets of the on-ball screen, and they really lean into the defender, into the guard with their knee, making sure we pick them up as quickly as possible. So I guess there's some core principles that we're using to try and clean the game up and also open the game up as well.
I know LaMelo Ball recently came to your league, right, for a year. What was it like having him? I'm sure he must have given the league a big boost, right?
Yeah, he was great. I mean, he went to Illawarra, to the Hawks. For our overseas guests, Illawarra is about an hour drive south of Sydney, and the Sydney Kings are the other team out of Sydney. It's he was great. He was great for the league. I mean, he just brought so many eyeballs to the league. It was always going to be interesting to see how he adjusted to a game with men. I think we were lucky. We were very lucky that we had already made some of those changes around freedom of movement and reducing the physicality. You go back maybe 7-8 seasons ago, I don't think that he would have been able to play as well, because there would have been too many hits away from the ball. So he actually did well. He played some great ball. I see he's doing really well in his NBA career so far. It's a real thrill to see those types of players and athletes, come to our league, and we're seeing more and more people as well. We had RJ Hampton as well. He went and played over in Auckland, in New Zealand with the Breakers. He did extremely well also. A really talented young athlete. He did well, and Brian Bowen as well. The year before that, he went and played with the Sydney Kings. So Didi Lazada, he came over, a Brazilian-based player. He played with the Sydney Kings. So we've had a lot of good new talent. Kids who are skipping the college system and coming straight from high school. And our league's a good place for it. We all speak the same language. Sure, my accent's different to yours.
It's great.
The Kiwi accent, New Zealand's a little bit different again, but after a while, you get the rhythm of it and you get the cadence. It's if you pick any English speaking person, you pick them up and put them here in Australia, it's pretty much the same as anywhere else.
Off topic, how many different accents are there in Australia?
That's a really good question. So there are regional accents. So the accents in the cities are a little bit different to some of the accents in the country or the regional areas. Maybe some of that nasally twang is a bit more, prevalent in the regions. You can generally understand the difference. Someone from the north of the country to the south of the country, it's not that big a difference, but it's different enough. often you can pick where someone's from by their word choices,
Okay.
or their pronunciation, for example. So, a simple one might be the name Grant. In some parts of the country, they'll say Grant, whereas
Okay.
other parts of the country, they'll say Grant. So there'll be those types of things, but by and large, it's pretty much the same. It might be a little bit slower in some parts of the country versus others, but it's pretty much the same.
U.S. has a lot of diversity with their accents. There's got to be like 100.
We're not like that. I mean, I think the big difference would be, the country areas, the regional areas, where you could hear a distinct difference, but the use of language is pretty much the same. A lot of the slang we use would be very, very similar across the country.
So that was your accent content. Thanks for listening. Scott.
Yeah, next.
Mr. Butler, what else are we going to talk about?
I want to talk about, I think we should talk about self-assessment.
Go ahead.
This has been my biggest challenge line for anyone who's going to work in the NBL. You've got to do your self-assessment. You've got to look at your game critically. You've got to analyze your game critically. You can't just gloss over everything and think it's all okay. Because because I sit in the replay center for all games, I know it's not okay. So to give you an idea of what the referees receive on game night. So on game night, we cut out anywhere from 20 to 30 plays for the referees to look at from the replay center with all of the angles that are available. So if there's a goaltend play or a basket interference play, block charge play, you'll have broadcast angle, you'll have baseline camera angle, roaming camera angle, you might have the angle above the, inside the backboard above the rim. So we cut all those plays out and label them all. And then within 15 minutes when the game's done, I then send them to the crew and our referee coaches, for the game. So by the time they finish their shower, they'll have all of these various plays to look at. Then within an hour of the game, the broadcast will be uploaded into Huddle. They'll have access to the full broadcast. So they'll have all that information immediately within an hour of the game. So the self-assessment process is really important, because even if the game is easy, there'll be still things within the game where you can look at, did I have the best position on this play? What was my communication like on this play? Did I have really good body language on this difficult call? There's always something to pick out, because when I go through the complete cut up and I chart every correct call, every incorrect call, every incorrect no call, that complete, top to bottom review of the game, the referees get an idea of, where they're sitting. But at the elite end, a referee's development really is through detailed self-assessment and being honest. You got to do it. You got to do it.
Got to be your own worst critic, right?
Yeah, you're doing, and you should be doing simple things like always looking for the root cause of something. So it can be the root cause of the incorrect call or the miss, or even the root cause of a correct call. Why did I actually get that right? And ask that almost that childlike question, like when the kids ask you why. By the time you get down to 4 or 5 whys, you should have the root cause of a play. So why did I miss that hands foul at the rim? Well, the first question you should ask yourself is, was I in the right position? No, I wasn't. Well, why wasn't I in the right position? Well, I didn't work hard enough in transition. Well, why didn't you work hard enough in transition? Well, when the ball was at the other end of the floor in the previous front court, I got myself caught because I was too far under the play. So you can actually then almost roll the tape back 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds and find the root cause of a play that happens 30 seconds later. So that's one of the reasons why self-assessment in my mind is so important. You don't have to look at a tape for long. You can look at a few minutes of each quarter, and that can be enough if it's an easy game. But when the game blows up, I mean, you could spend 3-4 hours in a game just looking at the root cause of why the game blew up. You know, assess your communication style, assess your body language all the time. Those things are critical, and as you said, you should be your own worst critic, and that's why self-assessment is so important.
And conversely, on the other hand, you have to be your biggest champion too, because a lot of times we are constantly breaking down what we do wrong and highlighting the negatives, but it's important to never beat yourself up. And you know, I talk to so many officials that get so frustrated over missed calls, and I've been there. We've all been there. No one wants to miss anything, but it's just so important to keep a high confidence level.
Yeah, I think celebrating the good stuff is important too. And you know, I try to make sure that as a leader of my group, that as the head of officials, that we celebrate the good stuff as well. So, you know, there'll be times through the course of a season where I'll put out a package of plays for the group, and it'll be, you know, here's a correct call, here's a good example of what we're looking for. You know, basically do more of this, guys, because I love this. This is great. And I think that you can do that not only as an official when you're looking at your own game, but if you're a leader of people and you're looking to make change, you need to make change by identifying the issues and turning them into coaching points, but also highlighting the good stuff as well and saying, here's all the good examples of what we want. Make sure we keep doing more of this, everybody.
Well, I really appreciate your time. You're so insightful, and I just really loved listening to you speak. I want to have you back on to talk to my mentor group. I know we spoke about that before. I know we talked about going over some plays tonight. Maybe we can save that for the mentor group next time.
Yeah, let's do that, because I've got some stuff that I was going to dig out for this session, but you know, just ran out of time with the way the work week went. But I think with your mentor group, that might be really useful. We can maybe put some life to how we move between coverages, like I was talking about earlier.
In closing, is there anything else you want to say to the dedicated audience of basketball officials from around the world that are listening?
I think that this podcast, this is the type of thing that you need to get involved in more often. If you are just listening to the same group of people all the time, you're never going to improve. You're going to improve within their system, but you need outside influences to help you think about things a little bit differently, maybe a little bit of a point of view as well. Sometimes just the use of a word might be enough to initiate a different way of looking at a play. This type of podcast, I think this is important. These things are important, and education like this is important as well.
Thanks for saying that, Scott, and thank you so much for coming on. I learned a lot from you, and look forward to doing it again sometime.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Crown Refs Podcast. Serve the game.